All right. Good evening, everyone. How are we all doing tonight? I moved this back from the morning, and I might do morning next week. It really depends on how things are going in order to accommodate social. And we're back. All of them are downloaded here. The first one I want to talk about is this video that came out a couple days ago from Midwinter Minis about why people don't want to play historical war games in comparison to things like Warhammer 40K. And it's got some issues, so let's get started.
It's all fun and games until someone has to be the Nazis. Hi there, you're watching Midwinter Minis. My name's Guy.
And I'm Hattie, and in this video we're going to be painting up some cool tank models from Bolt Action, probably the most popular historical wargame. This video has been kindly sponsored by World of Warships, but we'll tell you about that.
This is going to be interestingly ironic in a few moments.
In a minute.
We're going to try and cover at least one thing every month that isn't something made by Games Workshop, and Bolt Action is something we get asked to cover a lot, so we thought we'd give it a go. We've got a few Bolt Action bits and bobs on our shelves, so we grabbed the M4 Sherman, the most widely used medium tank by the USA and the Western Allies in the Second World War, and also the Panzer IV, the most produced German tank in the same period. Now there's two of us, two tanks, all good, right? I asked Hattie which one she wanted to paint for the video, and she said, please don't make me paint the Nazis. And that got me thinking, isn't that really the main problem with historical wargaming? At least games that are set within living memory of a generation or two.
While we talk about that, we're going to paint up these tanks, but we'll pop in little descriptions of our painting processes and materials on the screen, just in case you want to know how we painted the models. I'll go first with the M4 Sherman.
Now before we go all doom and gloom and dive straight into the problems with historicals, let's cover some of the great things about them. They are more affordable to get into, with army boxes tending to run about...
Actually, they're radically more affordable to get into, particularly Bolt Action here. This is a matter of comparison. Let's say $50 United States buys you 10 models generously of Warhammer 40K stuff. It'll buy you 30 models of infantry for Bolt Action. So they're dramatically more affordable. And also, like, the way that Bolt Action is structured. OBS is going to do that thing to me again. I can't wait till the fiber optic gets here. You can get into this game a lot quicker and cheaper. However, most people don't start playing these games until their 30s. But the reason why is not what's going to be in this video.
Half the price per model of Warhammer, for example. They're grounded in reality, so if you're not really interested in sci-fi or fantasy, or maybe you're a history buff, this stuff is going to pique your interest. There's also something really exciting about living out well-documented battles on the tabletop, with moments of unbelievable heroism, bravery, and victory against all odds. Also, the rules, particularly for Bolt Action, are great, well known and loved in the wargaming community for its blend of fast-paced action, well-balanced forces, interesting scenarios, and random activation that keeps you on your toes during the game.
From a hobbying side...
That's absolutely correct. It is a fantastic game. However, I don't... It should be pointed out that this game was written by two beloved veteran Games Workshop writers.
Historicals are a lot easier to paint because most things are pretty drab and camouflaged, which makes for very forgiving paint jobs. No crazy multicolour wet blends, over-the-top saturation and contrast, or legions of super soldiers wearing colours that are a total pain to paint.
But we've got to talk about the elephant in the room here. Or maybe the fascist in the gaming club? Now, let me be really, really clear here. We're not accusing anyone of anything, we're both just genuinely curious as to why historical wargaming isn't as popular as the make-believe stuff we all love. One obvious issue is that the armies in historical wargames were real, and were made of real people, and real people lived, fought, and died for their countries and ideologies. In make-believe settings like Warhammer 40k, the baddies, by which I mean everyone, don't really exist. And while they might be allegories or warnings of how humanity may end up, the crazy space fantasy aesthetic and over-the-top vibe of the whole thing stops it from being grounded in reality and makes it more palatable. In a world where even the good guys are horrible, the baddies are badder than bad. And in the stories and background of the game, they commit horrific atrocities and war crimes, but they're not real. It's escapism, like watching a scary film. It's fun because it's not real. The other side of this coin is historical war games like Bolt Action. Basically, someone has to play as the Nazis, or
No. Thank you, OBS. Every time I talk, doing that is wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate it. You do not have to play as Nazis. There's nothing that says you have to play as historically accurate factions. Um, Sometimes pains are taken to do that at events and tournaments, but if your buddy's got an army of, say, Napoleonic French and you have the Swiss, you can play it, or you have Germans and Japanese or Americans and British, you two can play against each other. There's nothing that says that. And there's no rule system in even any of the games I've ever seen. The only game I've ever seen that explicitly divides forces into good and evil is Games Workshop's Middle Earth Lord of the Rings game. And even that makes allowances to just have a player be evil for the sake of the rules. So you don't have to do those things. And I don't think that's why people don't play them. I think the difference is if you're going, and this applies to things that aren't publicly supported by Games Workshop either. Everyone everyone's heard of 40K at this point, and everyone's heard of Warhammer, Age of Sigmar, and Fantasy. They also, in most places in the United States and Great Britain, are not that far from a store that specifically caters to Games Workshop products. That's run and operated by Games Workshop, and that's the only thing they do. Um, and this is where a lot of people go. They congregate, they hang out, and this concept of your friendly local hobby store is no longer nearly as popular as it once was. So there's not as many inroads to other gaming systems, whether they're historical or fantasy based otherwise. So not a lot of people pick them up. Uh, I've had a hell of a time when I came out to Colorado finding people uh, to play, and they're all more southernly located in the state than I am. And that's because there's not that many storefronts, there's not that many places to congregate that allow that. And because this is and the pandemic's also actually absolutely crushed things for this hobby. Um, the alternative really is you go to a Games Workshop store. There's one here in the middle of nowhere. So that's not, I don't think, the difference. The difference is access, like where you can go and congregate. And I think that's a symptom of our society, at least here in the United States, not being as open visiting and hobbies anymore. There's a lot fewer garage gamers than there used to be, a lot fewer basement gamers than there used to be.
at least a Nazi allied army. Understandably, some people might feel that playing as the Nazis is inherently immoral or offensive, regardless of the historical context. It seems maybe a bit.
The second thing that a lot of people discuss in hobbying circles is this concept, and they discuss it especially for 40K too, is a statement of belief on my part. This is where most of the model ranges are. You have, and TTRPGs are kind of different. Um, I think a lot of people, I also think more people meet up for those TTRPGs than they do, and they operate on Discord. And I'm sure plenty of people play all these games on like Tabletop Simulator or what have you. But for the most part, uh, the hobby's traditionally been in a physical, in-person portion. But yeah, like I was saying, the German range, if you go to Warlord's website, the German range is significantly massive. They've got uh, late and early war Germans, and they've got winter and summer camouflage. They've got Fallschirmjäger and SS, and they have various things to support that. Like it's a huge range. In comparison, you say someone like the Italians is a significantly smaller range. people generally tend to buy product if it's not necessarily difficult to acquire the parts, especially as people have moved away from the practice of conversions in hobby.
Yucky or weird to be having fun playing as them or collecting them, glorifying or romanticizing a regime that commits.
And I don't see this problem hugely present in like World War II grand strategy games like Hearts of Iron, where a lot of people sign up to play the Germans and do not necessarily connect with that ideology. Also, Paradox takes great pains in all of their games to avoid those aspects of the ideology.
Committed real-life atrocities. The stuff also happened within living memory of some people. Now, those people are really old now, to be fair, and they probably won't be playing war games, but their families might, and it might leave a bad taste in their mouths. Many people have experienced trauma or have family members who have experienced trauma related to the events in the Second World War. Now, both Hattie and I have family members who actually fought in these wars. Both our grandfathers were in the RAF. My great-grandfather was awarded the Victoria Cross, and I'm pretty sure that given the scale of these conflicts, most people watching this video will have family members who were involved. Playing a game where one player is controlling the Nazis might not sit right with a lot of people. In simple terms, games that are based in realism, portraying real-life death and destruction that happened, is going to turn a lot of people off. Killing fantasy space bugs with stompy robots? Awesome, let's go. Also, let's not pretend that far-right groups don't still exist, and that their supporters might be into tabletop games.
As a rule, I have seen a lot of communities. This hasn't been a huge problem, actually. Not nearly to the degree that people try to claim it is. And whenever I have seen it crop up, I've also seen it people summarily like exiled. No one will play with them. They won't connect with them online. People who are way too into that particular aspect of it, the wearaboo types, gone. Here, this state here, we have a unified group across the state. We had someone come in and make a bunch of really weird comments and then make some questions about painting their miniatures using swastikas. And me and a couple other people pointed out that if you're painting a German army, to be historically accurate, they don't stick swastikas on everything. They used the Balkanroos symbol instead. And that discussion escalated to the point where we noticed that this guy was a little unhinged, and off he went. Like, does this categorically not occur? No, but it's also not nearly the degree to which people say it does. I think it's a lot more common in Warhammer 40k circles. And Games Workshop, to their credit, put out that statement 2 years back about Warhammer being for everybody and caught a lot of flack from the online right culture warriors for it. So steps are being taken to kind of avoid that being a widespread problem. I don't think that contributes to why people are not playing war games either.
Okay, so I think my tank's done. I'm really pleased with how that camouflage turned out. Turns out blue tank's a really useful tool. Also, I'm glad I did the two-tone in the beiges, because I think that gives it a little extra spice. I think it's pretty
As an aside, when I do camouflage on my tanks, I usually use a sponge.
cool how using matte varnish over transfer makes everything look like it's just painted on and supposed to be there rather than a transfer. And this was actually my first time using transfers, so I think they turned out quite well. Actually, this is the first time I've painted anything historical, and it was surprisingly easy. If you get the basic elements right, you just need to add a little bit of weathering and it's pretty much done. Although
They are easy. I really do like them for being easy.
maybe I could have eased up on the mud.
So Hattie's done, I'm up next. A perfect break in the action to tell you about the awesome sponsor of this video, World of Warships. Now,
normally I don't play other people's sponsored sections, but we are for this one because something kind of important comes up.
I don't know if you knew already, but I only accept sponsorships on the channel from stuff that I actually use in real life, and that way you hopefully know my endorsement.
Tier 3 German battleship, Nassau.
is genuine. I play World of Warships, and given you're watching a video about real-world weapons of war, it seems a pretty good fit for the video, right? World of Warships is a graphically stunning, very fun naval combat game where you can take command of over 300 destroyers, cruisers, battleships, aircraft carriers, and even submarines now in all-out online multiplayer warfare. I play it on PC, but it also has a console version too, and best of all, they are all free to play. But unlike other free-to-play games, it's not just pay to win. The more you play, the more you can unlock your tech tree of new ships, commanders, and abilities.
Let's imagine that he's taking footage from his own game, which he probably is. All of these are German ships.
Gameplay-wise, it's great fun. There's something very satisfying about blowing up ships with literally the biggest guns humans have ever made while trying not to accidentally plow yourself into rocks. And being a bit of an audio nerd, I couldn't help noticing that this game has some of the best sound design I've heard in a while. Very immersive, and the score is really nice too. If you're new to the game and sign up using the code WARSHIPS, you'll get some bonus doubloons, credits, premium account time, and a ship. You might also find yourself fighting alongside, or against me, but be warned, I'm pretty good at this. Back to the painting. I'm going to give the Panzer IV.
The only reason I kind of bring this up is Nassau is a dreadnought battleship, and it would have been part of the Imperial German Navy in World War I. But very quickly, as you progress through World of Warships, you're going to progress through ships that were in the Kriegsmarine in World War II. I don't think these, and it's not uncommon to have people play those ships, and it's not uncommon. People don't talk about that factor all the time.
For an efficient, speedy, but hopefully pretty great looking paint job. Now, not wanting to paint everyone with the same brush, but what reasons might a person have for actively collecting an Axis army? Maybe they're just a power gamer. The Germans had some really good equipment, tanks and tactics. Maybe they just want to win the games they play. Maybe they're a historian who studied the German perspective of the war, or to understand the psychological rationale.
Okay, grab these off my shelf, talk about something real quick. One of the things that people love about bolt action is it is really, really tightly designed. So let's just take these two tanks. Let's just take these two tanks for a moment. And I'm going to flip open to this and read a couple things. And two parts in particular. The Panzer IV, which is a tank he's painting, it costs 175 points for a regular tank. It has a turret-mounted light howitzer, and it has a damage value of 9. Let's grab this United States book, because it's probably faster to find the M4 in here. Theoretically. There's a whole lot of M4 Sherman models that you can play around with and buy. 185 points, roughly the same thing. One medium anti-tank gun and damage value 9. They're basically the same tank. They're basically the same tank. And you're usually only going to take one. So, things in this game are designed so that they're very tightly built around being pretty similar. A rifle is a rifle. They don't distinguish between different models used by different countries. Submachine gun is a submachine gun, etc. A soldier has a rating of inexperienced, regular, or veteran. And that assigns not a set of stats, but basically a die roll to them. It's not a game that's built in the same way that 40K is. So again, the biggest issue of why people don't play historical war games, and I think more people should play them, is excess. access to being able to get into the hobby, having people to play with, being able to find and build a community.
Rationale behind regimes like Nazism. Maybe they're just big Hugo Boss style aficionados, but maybe, just maybe, they might be slightly too into it. Another reason historical wargames like Bolt Action might not get the same traction and community engagement as stuff like Warhammer is because, for us as content creators, making a video that talks about stuff like the Nazis and maybe uses swastika
I think the only case where if you're building a historically based model army, you'd use swastikas on anything would be Finland. Yeah, it would be Finland. Finland picks up in the middle of World War II. They have the continuation war with the Soviet Union. They ended up fighting, not really ideologically committed, but committed on the grounds of the fact that the Soviets are assholes, which is a good enough reason as any, as it turns out. So Germany sent them, and a large number of things like the Stug 3, which they outfitted in a swastika. It would be like Ukraine painting the United States flag on Bradley's, which would probably be inadvisable. But that's really what would end up happening. The German army, not even the SS, would outright put swastikas on their vehicles.
Obviously not a great topic or franchise for YouTube videos, at least for channels like us who do this as their actual job. Now, what a perfect time to remind you that we simply couldn't do this full-time without our amazing support on Patreon, and we'll give our newest members a big thank you at the end of the video. So on paper, a great historical wargame like Bolt Action has every right to be the main tabletop miniatures game, rather than Warhammer 40k.
I don't think that's the case. Again, Games Workshop spends an enormous amount of money on brick and mortar operations, and you don't find a lot of stores carrying other games, including Bolt Action. And when you do, they're nearly always going to include Games Workshop products as well. Like, they have a ridiculous amount of market saturation.
But it's not. People say 40k is so popular because it has such a rich lore and backstory, and it's been going since the 80s and has thousands of films and hundreds of video games, as well as accounts from real humans. One of my favourite memories of when I was little was listening to my granddad's war story. Now, for some people, the historical aspect might be a turn-off, kind of like forced learning. I mean, not everyone enjoyed history at school, after all. Also, people that play both Warhammer 40k and Bolt Action pretty much unanimously agree that Bolt Action is the more fun game, with modern, engaging rules and gameplay. And Bolt Action, while it's still a premium franchise and isn't cheap, is still far more affordable than 40k to get into, and it's easier to paint. So, on paper, it's all coming up Bolt Action. So, why can't it knock 40k off the top spot? Is it because someone has to play the Nazis? Speaking of which, my Panzer IV is done. Just like Hattie said before, I'm really impressed at how quickly and easily these things come together. I only really felt like there was about 5 or 6 real steps in this, and it looks great. It looks like you could take a photo or a kind of cool glamour shot with some interesting terrain and it might look real. I wasn't 100% sure where the transfers were supposed to go because there's a lot of detail on the model itself, kind of obscuring the flat armor areas, a problem I'm well used to with 40k, but I think it looks pretty realistic. Not historically accurate, I don't think, but looks cool, and very, very easy to achieve. So hopefully if you end up needing to paint loads of German tanks, these techniques might help you.
So, is there something else we're missing? Let us know in the comments. Do Do you play historicals? How do you feel about it? Even if you don't play historical war games, let us know too. Would you have no problem at all, or does the idea of playing a game based on real wars feel a bit off? Or maybe we're just overthinking the whole thing. Do you want to see more bolt action?
No, I think the trouble is you didn't think about the thing at all. You showed a bolt action rule book, which had rules for all of these things. You could have researched this before you put this video out. Just like 5 minutes. I appreciate the tanks. They're well done. This one's a little weird otherwise. But 2 out of 10.
Not other historicals on the channel. We've got the Bolt Action Band of Brothers starter set and a few characters we could paint if you fancied seeing those. Maybe even a little battle report or a learn to play video. Let us know.
And as I said, a massive thanks to our amazing Patreon supporters who have joined us recently. Mark's Game Room, Brendan M, Ryan Evans.
We're going to move ahead to the next bit. This is infographic show from yesterday, and I didn't watch it prior. It's why Ukraine proves NATO is a failure. And because I didn't watch it prior, we might have a thing. Also, I switched the internet connection out to my phone. Let me know if things are weird.
The war in Ukraine is the most destructive conflict that Europe has seen since the Second World War. And it's all NATO's fault because NATO is weak. No, this video isn't sponsored by the Russian Ministry of Defense. The fact is, the invasion of Ukraine is NATO's greatest failure in its short history, and it failed because the entire alliance is a shadow of its former self. The Great Peace dividend at the end of the Cold War finally made Europeans as weak as the Soviets always claimed they were. Even the United States severely curtailed its military capabilities. Now the peace is over, and war is in Europe because NATO decided to take a 30-year nap. NATO was originally founded after the Second World War. Surveying the destruction in Europe and the rise of the Soviet Union, the US asked Europe, hey, what if we make the most Chad military alliance of all time? To
Yes, that's exactly what they said.
which Europe replied, yeah, that's a great idea. And hey, also, what if you pay for like most of it? Thus, NATO was born out of a desire to ensure peace in Europe and deter a third, far more catastrophic world war. The containment and deterrence of the Soviet Union was a top priority for everyone who didn't like the idea of turning the world into a permanent fallout LARP event. But even a conventional war with the Soviets would be catastrophic for Europe, and inevitably end with many of the continental European powers becoming yet another Soviet republic. And that's why the United States was integral to the alliance. But this required it to station a large amount of its forces in Europe itself. Otherwise, it would take months to build significant military power in Europe, by which time Soviet hordes would have overrun most of the continent. But the alliance...
So we know most of NATO's plans in the event of a breakout of a war. There was never a point that anyone supposed they had sufficient parity with the USSR on the Warsaw Pact to take them conventionally without resorting to tactical nuclear weapons. So I'm not entirely certain from what step we are saying this is weaker. Let's see if they look towards a source, which infographics show generally doesn't, and that's always fun.
Alliance didn't just see the U.S. as a safeguard against the Soviet invasion, it was also a check against...
What is this? What is this animation? Jesus Christ. Like, this is almost pastiche in how bad it is.
the resurgence of a different evil altogether. For the
It
better
has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
part of, well, its entire history, Europe has struggled with nationalism. During the first half of the 20th century, however, the rise of nationalism across the continent set the stage for two catastrophic wars. Left reeling in the wake of the Second World War, both the US and the exhausted Western powers feared that from the ashes a fresh wave of nationalism would spring up. Now, some trilogies are great, Lord of the Rings, Alien, but other trilogies are crimes against humanity, The Hobbit, and World Wars. Nobody had any interest in yet another war arising from Europe's favorite hobby of electing a dictator into power and then bashing your neighbor's face in with a bunch of tanks. The US took on the form of a Hobbesian benevolent Leviathan and was seen as a check against the rise of nationalism in Europe. NATO would make the US heavily invested in European security, ensuring it didn't simply lose interest again and piss off across the pond like it did for much of the previous 100 years. Americans, for their part, were extremely skeptical in further involvement in Europe after 2 world wars, and isolationism has always run deep in America due to the security of having 2 oceans.
There really wasn't much of a play. NATO effectively happened without much intervention from the American public. This was a State Department and a Department of Defense baby that they shepherded through and got the Senate to sign off on. And part of it, the success of NATO even occurring in the first place, is because of the massive investment brought on by the Marshall Plan. And like that's integral to understanding the history of NATO, is just how important we viewed protecting the investment of the Marshall Plan was.
Oceans between itself and the rest of the world. Rome may burn again tomorrow, but the Americans will still be eating cheeseburgers and chasing Bigfoot unless the barbarians build a fleet of aircraft carriers. But the best way to avoid conflict is for everyone to get along in a nice, tight little huddle where no one has the room to reach for a gun. That's why NATO's third goal was to promote European unity. After 2 world wars and centuries of devastating conflicts, the best and brightest military and political minds on the continent got together to debate the future of Europe. After making the observation that Europe has historically launched devastating war after devastating war every 10 to 20 or so years, someone got the brilliant idea of
that's some cycle of history nonsense. Prior to World War I, Europe had had about 100 years worth of long-standing peace on the continent. You also didn't really even have the population necessary to launch widespread wars prior to that, or the ability to mobilize. The big wars in Europe, like the 7 Years' War, were exceptions, not the rule.
what if we don't anymore? And the goal of European unity was born. Thus, NATO served to create the groundwork for the European Union, which would ultimately be the best guarantor of peace. If Europeans could stop fighting each other, here's looking at you, France and Britain, and Germany, then another world war would likely be prevented. Further, of much concern as communism spread its tentacles across war-torn Central Europe, and after the overthrow of the Czech Republic's government by rebels. Therefore, the Soviet Union saw communism as the only way to ensure its own survival against the capitalist West, and thus the stage was naturally set for conflict between the two.
That's not. The ideological concerns of communism are probably a secondary point for the Soviet Union insofar as security is concerned. Russia has always looked for border states. The only thing I would say about Russian history is they're amazingly consistent in their objectives across time and regime. The Warsaw Pact was just a different expression of what they've always tried to do with Poland, for example.
2 blocks. In 1949, NATO was officially born, and war disappeared forever. Well, not quite, but to its credit, NATO truly is the most successful international alliance of all time. The Delian League may have protected Europe from being overrun by a Persian invasion, irrevocably changing its entire history.
Why are we talking about the Delian League? Also, why aren't we contextualizing the Delian League?
But it didn't stop the outbreak of a world-ending nuclear war. NATO's greatest
How could the Delian League stop anything? It was in 2,000 years prior.
success is ensuring that the Cold War never turned hot. Through a combination of containment and deterrence, NATO was able to ensure that any conflict between itself and the Soviet Union would incur costs too unbearable or simply not have the seeds it needed to ferment. Without NATO, a fragmented Europe would have been torn by the struggle between capitalist West and communist East, creating a nightmare of potential powder kegs that could signal the opening festivities to the Third and final World War. NATO's greatest strength was presenting a unified face against Soviet expansionism and political influence, even if that did mean occasionally the individual states would take decidedly undemocratic measures to silence pro-communist individuals. Hey, you either get to own the means of production, or you get to not live through a nuclear holocaust. NATO's second greatest strength was, well, its strength. Unified, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was far more powerful than any individual state, and this is what allowed the alliance to stand against and, at
Congratulations, you understand coalitions.
times, aggressive Soviet Union. The alliance was ready to exact a blood cost from the Soviets for any push into Western Europe, both by conventional or nuclear means. But that was tricky, given the alliance's greatest military power by a long margin was all the way across the ocean. In essence, the United States was like the Justice League Superman to Europe's Batman. Batman is cooler, he often has better story arcs, and he has free healthcare. But when the Soviets and Darkseid come invading, you really want Superman out there punching T-62 tanks with big, dumb, super strong fists. The challenge for the alliance was that most of America's firepower was across the sea or in other potential hotspots. Sometimes its military was heavily involved elsewhere, such as during the Vietnam War, and other times it was busy liberating South American democracies from themselves. During the Vietnam War alone, a significant amount of U.S. firepower was tied up for nearly 2 decades, and it was here that NATO was more important than ever before. By presenting a unified front, the Western European powers presented a significant obstacle to the Soviets, even without full U.S. commitment. But things may not have been that way, which is why NATO's political...
Yeah, this video is very superficial. They need to get to a point very quickly, because there are things to talk about here, but they're not talking about them.
maneuvering was also one of its greatest victories. Spain, for example, could have been a serious chink in NATO's armor up until it joined the alliance in 1982. But this future was far from certain. After Spain's Francisco Franco died in 1975, it was Juan Carlos, King of Spain, and appointed ruler by Franco, who led the nation through democratic reforms. But the Soviets had attempted to heavily influence Franco, albeit without much success given that Franco fought the communists during the Spanish Civil War. Had things gone
Also, Franco was a fascist.
differently, Spain might have been the westernmost member of the Soviet bloc, a move which would have escalated tensions in Europe to unfathomable levels. Deft political maneuvering and the culture of European unity fostered by NATO helped ensure that this did not come to pass. NATO's unity, however, also helped to severely curtail nuclear proliferation, further adding to its list of successes. Under Article 5 of the Alliance Charter, an attack on one member is an attack on all, and this includes nuclear weapons. The
Okay, I am done with this nonsense. You're not dead in a nuclear firestorm. Congratulations. Last thing I want to look at tonight, and apparently this discussion got interesting at a certain point, is the Wikidology Sunday discussion of Jordan Neely from last week. I'm just going to say it out loud up front. This does contain the footage of the event on the New York subway in which Jordan Neely was murdered. Trigger warning, I guess.
About Utah. So
Yes.
it's not exactly a paywall. So what happened is Utah put a law requiring some sort of verification system. I'm not sure the details on that, but in response, Pornhub decided to block all of the users from
Different than the UK. I was just out in London.
to your. If they're in my face, if they're like in person with me, and they're shouting in my face how they're going to hurt me.
If they didn't do something like that, doesn't strike me as.
If that understanding changes because new information is released, I'll change my opinion, and I think that's negligence. I think negligent being in fear give you
He's looking for the right spot.
that justification.
Tune in to listen to them.
Oh, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks for joining us. I'm sure we have a lot of opinions to go through.
Yeah.
We also got the exact inversion of Lance, Seamus Coughlin.
That's how they describe me on the streets. My name is
Anti-Lance?
Yeah, exactly. I thought, no, they call him the anti-Seamus, I thought. But my name's Seamus Coughlin. I make cartoons. We call them
British.
Freedom Tunes. And he's British? Is that?
Incidentally, anyone who feels the need to call their product Freedom or Patriot usually isn't.
I always got to take it to an ethnic place with me, man. Always ripping on me for being Irish. I was born here.
Either of you
but
ever heard of this guy?
I make cartoons.
do we know?
He looks like Lactoid if he was somehow whiter. I don't know.
Fair enough. Carry on.
I have a YouTube channel called Freedom Tunes. I'm also a podcaster. We uploaded a cartoon today, by the way. Y'all might want to check that one out. And I also have a stream on Rumble called Shamer. If y'all want to take a peek at that as well.
Oh, is he the Freedom Tunes person? Okay.
Apparently. I don't know him.
And we have Moon Lord himself.
I
I'm not
am
familiar with that.
the Moon Lord.
He knows.
No longer Weed Lord. I have evolved. I have become
Oh,
knows.
Hey,
one with
Wiki
the
Readers.
essence.
Lonerbox, welcome. Lonerbox and Co. We are with Kidology and President Sunday, and we are watching Tim Pool versus the Surfs. You're lucky we just started. The first 30 minutes was tech issues. We sorted that out, right? So you got here just in time. Thank you for the raid. Sit back and have a watch as we see what goes on here. Carry on. Sorry about that. Make my money.
What'd I do? Okay.
The vibration and the fabric of reality. So good to see you, Lance.
So good to be here.
And if you don't know, you don't know. But I am the Moon Lord. Let's get hot.
And I am Surge.com as always, guys. Let's get to it.
Let's jump into this first. You
Wait,
pressing
actually,
the wrong button over
this
here.
is I gotta flag this. This is the first time Ian and I have done a show together in almost a year.
Since we
Can you
screamed
speed it up
about,
a
I was
little?
yelling at you
Like,
about religion.
What's that?
Can you speed it up a little? Put it on like
Do you want to speed it?
125
Okay.
or something.
Okay, we can 1
Just-
125.
Yeah, that just to start. I don't care about all the introductions.
This not. Do we need to jangle some keys for you there, Wick? Thank you, Sean Croner, for the $5. Appreciate it.
You could just
Religion or something.
Exactly.
Oh, and
This is our
alcohol, I
first.
Oh, sorry, kid. I didn't mean to.
I just said, Wick, you can just watch a little bit of anime in the meantime. while we watch
Exactly.
the introductions.
Nice. No, there are a lot of other things I would rather do with my time. But carry on.
Show. Yeah, that's our first
Welcome
show
back,
Yeah,
Seamus.
it's
Great
good to be here, man.
Yeah, I've evolved on my stance on religion.
We've also talked off air. We've talked off air a good bit, but it's just funny that it's like I just realized it's our first episode we're both doing together because I've been seeing you for the past 2 weeks.
Yeah, we went last time we talked. We were talking about like I brought up vice. I was talking about alcohol. So you're
I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit so we get into it. Here we go.
Yeah.
And then, but like his blood is alcoholic. Is that why it's wine?
So the properties of bread and wine remain, but what we believe as Catholics is that it's his literal flesh and blood.
Okay.
His body, blood, soul, and divinity.
But he's not made of bread and wine.
No, he's not literally made of bread and
and
wine. No.
get crunk.
All right, let's read the news. Here we go.
Wait, we also have Serge Dupre.
Sir,
You already did say.
Untreated, unmonitored, etc., etc.
People call this lynching, right? I've heard that term thrown around. I've heard on the opposite end that this guy's a hero who did nothing wrong, right? So I'm just curious where both of you fall. What do you think, Sunday? What is this guy a hero or a villain? Is he a murderer or is he simply a good Samaritan?
I want to. I haven't seen the footage yet, so I still need to look at that. My understanding is that the person was holding the guy in a chokehold for somewhere between 2 minutes and 15 minutes, depending on who you speak to. I'd want confirmation on that. It's kind of
I think it was clarified later that it wasn't 15 minutes, and 15 minutes is entirely excessive. Like, if you have someone in a chokehold for 15 minutes, they're very, very dead.
difficult to say. Like,
Hey, Hetman. Hetman's in the chat. If you want to get in on this, Hetman, hop in Discord.
on the one hand, it seems just from what little I know of. About it. Jordan Neely as a person has a fairly violent history already, and the fact that he was out on the streets, untreated, unmonitored, etc., speaks to like wide systemic issues by itself. Like that shouldn't have been the case. With respect to the person holding him to the point of his death, I would need to see how he was behaving, whether or not, like, up until that moment, he seemed to actually, like, logically pose a threat to the person. Whether or not the person's death was unjust and a result of, like, systemic neglect.
More to the point, it doesn't matter what you're doing at any given point. There are other things that you can do to get someone to stop doing something short of choking them.
Doesn't mean that you can tell somebody to endanger themselves for that person's sake in an encounter on the street. If he was holding him past the point of him ceasing to struggle, then I don't think I would ever characterize this as a lynching, but it's definitely in the direction of manslaughter or even murder if he went beyond the point of actually subduing him and just held on. But I'd have to see the footage.
Sure. Any thoughts on this, Mythology?
I think it's very difficult and I think impossible to sort of characterize something or a situation as being sort of moral or not, or the individual being a hero or not, when I think that inevitably in such a situation, everybody is just acting on instinct and impulse. So I think this idea of, somebody being a hero for just doing something in, quick thinking is, I think, not a good idea at all. I think that I don't think that he should be charged for what he did.
I utterly disagree, but I've watched the footage. We'll see it come up again. Keep loading the book.
Because I do think that it was quite a harrowing situation for everybody on the subway. Yeah.
Does being scared give you the right justification, ability, whatever word you want to use? Does being in fear give you that justification to attack someone or restrain someone or use violence against someone?
That's a tricky question because
from a standpoint of categorizing the violence, I want to point out again that putting someone in a chokehold, this particular choke is called the rear naked choke. Putting someone in a chokehold is going beyond violence. It's a submission move. It's designed to end a fight. I'm just pulling this up because he was a Marine, so presumably the individual in question was a Marine, so presumably he has a understanding of at least basic Marine Corps, or the Army calls it combatives, but Marine Corps, Marine Semper Fu is what it's colloquially called in the Marine Corps. I'm just looking here real quick through the counters to chokes and holds, arm manipulation, knife fighting. No arm bars, huh? Enhanced pain compliance. That's probably it. Manipulations. Yeah. I mean, it's right here. All of this, wrist locks, arm bars, all of those basic kind of things let you maintain control over someone without killing them. And none of these things are actually that advanced. Like, you can learn them, and they're taught, at least to soldiers, very quickly.
the fear of violence is precisely the principal justification for any kind of violence against your fellow human beings in a liberal society generally. If the person was legitimately fearing for his life if he let go, what are you going to tell him? Like, no, you can just die. Like, at that point, what you're criticizing isn't whether or not, by his own lights, he was justified in what he did. What you're criticizing, if the fear was real, is whether or not the fear was rational. So
I think the fear was sorry.
No, go on, please.
Yeah,
Sorry,
don't apologize for interrupting Sunday. Just do it, right? And then if he tries to complain, just stare at him. Just give him the eye.
Got it.
You know, I'm not actually autistic, right? Like I can survive that. Okay, just continue. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I think in this situation the fear was most definitely warranted because according to witnesses, this impersonator Neely, I believe his name, he was saying that he didn't care if he died, that he was ready to die, that he had nothing to live for, that he was homeless, and that life wasn't worth living, and he was threatening people as well. And so I think
This is a situation that could have been solved by giving him a buck and telling him to get a slice at the next stop. Hetman, you're still in chat. You've read the CTA before. I know I have many times in the decade I lived in Chicago. A person coming on the subway or the L train and ranting is an everyday occurrence. What, Bubba? I know they're eating food and you want to go eat food too. We will go downstairs in another 10 minutes.
in that situation, when somebody
We'll be taking a break shortly to feed the dog,
is behaving in that way, I can understand wanting to apprehend or to constrain the person if you can, in the interest of sort of this kind of utilitarian thinking of your actions in that sense.
So given that the man was a former Marine, right? And while not being a Marine myself, I was in the military, Air Force, right? So we a little bit different, a lot different, to be honest with you. But they do get training in how to subdue people. If you are using a chokehold for any longer than like a minute, 30 seconds to a minute, right? You're doing it wrong.
If you're using a chokehold for much longer than 15 seconds, you've exceeded anything that you're going to do in training. I mean, at that particular point, you're usually taught to tap out because you're not breaking the chokehold. More to the point, a minute is going to put someone into unconsciousness. Hey, Cal, a minute's going to put someone into unconsciousness. They will be subdued by then, or at the very verge of unconsciousness, at least.
It doesn't take that long.
They're saying, and people are saying
Yeah.
like just on the short end of 15 minutes.
The time is weird because I've heard different reports, right? I've heard 15 minutes, I've heard 3 minutes, I've heard 6 minutes. I don't know.
Right.
And again, if information comes out that changes the time, right, then my opinion might change.
But you're saying over 1 minute is too long, just by.
You probably shouldn't, right? Like,
Right.
Again, I wasn't there, so I don't know if he was struggling. Because 3 or 4 people held him down. It wasn't just this one guy who had him in the chokehold. It was multiple people holding this guy down, restraining him. So I don't know how much of a struggle there was. But I have seen parts of the video where there is a point where he is no longer struggling, where he has stopped
And he's still being held.
And he is still being held. Now,
I also see very quickly, I see some people in chat telling me that eyewitnesses say that he was actually grabbed from behind and he wasn't threatening people. So.
Look,
and we don't. I don't think we have footage of him prior to him being held. We have footage of him in the chokehold.
Yeah, I don't know. The mixed reports.
manual.
Some people say he was being threatening. Some people say he wasn't being threatened. I don't know.
I think it was sort of like indirectly being like he was saying things like I don't care if I get a life sentence. I'm ready to go to jail. And so I think in that
People saying crazy things on the subway is incredibly common. Sunday might not have. I don't know if Sunday's been a big city guy. I have a hard time seeing anyone visiting a big city and not encountering this as a phenomena. All right, here's what's going to happen because Avery is about to eat people, more specifically me. I'm going to go throw on the music and throw up the screen. It'll take a few minutes for me to go feed the dog, and we will come back. as soon as I find my thing. Here we go. Okay. Well, hey, Nick. All right, we're back. Dog is happy,
Sense that
theoretically.
implies something. I think maybe not directly threatening, but at least indirectly, something that could cause fear on public transport.
He did also say he was willing to hurt anyone on this train, right? Like he did.
But did he make a move to do so is really important. Like the category of self-defense, even in states where you do not have, where you have stand your ground laws, the person has to be, or should have to be, actively aggressing. And if this guy comes up behind him and is able to put him in a chokehold without first having to position him for it, it's very unlikely that he was actively struggling.
Say that. And again, given the context of there is violence in the subway, it's not unique, right? It's not vanishingly rare. It happens. It's not super common, but it happens. So I think initially restraining him was fine. I think I have no problem with someone initially saying, "Okay, you're threatening people. We want to keep you from doing harm." I think, however, that given if it was as reported, he held him for as long as he did, I think that's negligence. I think
I'm seeing somebody who is giving off essentially threatening vibes by implication, and legitimately threatening vibes, but vibes, verbally. This is a guy who's standing up, he's saying some stuff that is freaking people out in the subway. And I'm playing through like what a reasonable escalation would look like in my head. And the first thing is there's some kind of verbal altercation between somebody who's telling him to cut it out or to get off the thing, and then he doesn't comply. And then physicality breaks out after that. If indeed what took place is this person was speaking in that way and somebody just grabbed him from behind the neck, then even if it's 1 minute, I don't think that's acceptable. I think that's beyond the pale. I don't think we would really accept that in virtually any other case. And I think the fact that this person is homeless as well, and the stigma around that, and once again, like in this case, this guy, like unbeknownst to the people on the train, has like an extensive criminal history. I can absolutely believe that he was being as threatening as they are saying, or at the very least presenting.
Yeah, I think fashion. I agree with you in that.
Yeah. At no point is that ever necessarily going to justify. Is that going to justify a summary execution?
Practice verbal de-escalation, right? First, best practice, but you don't always have that. I guess I don't know if I'd require that, because I don't want it to be. I don't want to live in a world where if you don't act perfectly in this situation, that you face charges. I don't think that's wise. I don't think that's good for society. But I do agree with you that best practice, yes, probably try to talk them down first.
Well, how about this?
That doesn't work.
Let me pose this alternative scenario to you. Let's say Nick Fuentes got really sloshed one day and he's on the subway, and he's going on and on about how he wants to do violence to some member of some minority group, and he's giving off legitimately threatening vibes. A same Marine on the same subway is like, oh, that's not cool. This guy's like menacing people on the train, and he puts.
Yeah, actually finding out Wick served in the Air Force is very significant, I think. And it really depends. I would want to ask him what he did in the Air Force, because the only people are PJs and security forces who get close to combat and rules of engagement, usually, in the same way that Marines or Army would. Like that system of escalation that soldiers and Marines are taught very early on, kind of bedrock early on, is not necessarily taught to people who are not finding themselves in those situations. Military training is incredibly siloed. You're not necessarily going to see similar skill sets. Like the old adage that Marines and Army make is everyone's a rifleman is sure, everyone's a rifleman, but not everyone's an infantryman.
I'm in a chokehold from behind. If that's the sequence of events that took place, do you think that that's more than just like a non-ideal case, or do you think it's actually like just out of line?
Again, it would really depend on the context of what's being said, but I can imagine scenarios where it would be okay, where I'd be like, okay, that was the right call, and I can imagine scenarios it wouldn't, depending not just on the words he's using, but the actions he's doing. Like, so is he getting in people's face and literally like screaming so loud at them that he's spitting on them? Or is he throwing shit? Like, is he breaking I don't know, right? Like, I need more information.
I think the online response would also be very different if that were the case. And
as far as I know from talking with police officers and soldiers, is there are pretty radically different rules at play for police and escalation. They get away with a lot more escalation wise than the military would.
I think that's sort of an issue here as well. Like these things that just happen to be sort of very horrible and harrowing everyday things that happen to people in modern societies now sort of turn into these moralistic, political.
This is why I was concerned about anyone talking about the kidology, because he's not really saying anything here concrete about it. And really, what we should be doing is moving on to watching the footage, because at this point we're just speculating. Like, what might be okay? Well, let's look at the situation and see if it is okay.
Bickering arguments online, and I think the problem with sort of calling this man who put Neely in a chokehold sort of a hero is that I think it inadvertently sort of maybe not encourages, but sort of deems fit such behavior. Even though I think what he did, I can understand what he did. I think it sort of induces a sort of individual warrior sort of behavior, sort of this idea of anybody can be a hero in these public situations.
That's probably fair. One of the things that happened when Kyle Rittenhouse was tried that I kind of objected to was this concept that you can place yourself into a dangerous situation that you had no business of being in the first place and take deadly action against the person that you had no business being around in the first place and be justified in it. And when it happened and the verdict came out, I thought to myself, this is going to happen more often. This is absolutely going to happen more often, particularly as we live in an increasingly stochastic, terror-ready environment.
Situations when something not so serious is happening, if you know what I mean. I think somebody in my chat called it like this sort of vigilantism on public transport and in public places, and I think that's sort of when things get a bit out of hand.
Kind of like just like a masculine rah-rah. Yeah, I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna like rough this person up because they have that like fantasy going through their head. See, I would have said Wick to that question, like even in the case of Nick Fuentes doing exactly that, I wouldn't consider that to be justified at all. In this particular case, it seems like we're literally dealing with someone who is clearly demonstrating that they are mentally unwell, and we have a guy who here's what I suggest we do, because I don't think any of us have gone in depth into the details for the last couple of days, at least. Let's just take what these two agree upon as the facts, and we can sort of challenge them as they go as relevant, but we'll argue like on the basis of what these two know, and I think that will be a lot more helpful.
We'll go with that because again, not to do too many qualifiers here, but if the facts change, my opinion will change. Like, I'm going to base my understanding or my opinion off of the understanding I have of the situation. If that understanding changes because new information is released, I'll change my opinion, and I think that's fine. But let's hear it.
Okay, right? And very, very quickly, thank you, Not Brooks, for the $5. Need to know if anyone on stream has taken a subway in the last 6 months. I'm on Vancouver Island. I haven't taken a subway in years.
I know. Yeah,
that's what I figured. Sunday's probably not big on urbanism to begin with.
Well, I'm in rural Pennsylvania. I haven't.
Wick lives under the subway. He doesn't need to use it.
I live in the UK, so I take underground, and yes, I have. Yes.
You take Thestrals. Okay.
Issued a call for public help in their investigation. Jordan Neely, 30, died from a compression of the neck, the city's medical examiner determined Wednesday. Neely is recognizable to some New Yorkers as a Michael Jackson impersonator who regularly danced in the Times Square transit hub. On Monday afternoon, he was yelling and pacing back and forth on an F train in Manhattan. Witnesses and police said when he was restrained by at least 3 people, including a U.S. Marine veteran who pulled one arm tightly around his neck. A physical struggle ensued, leading to Neely losing consciousness. He was rushed to Lenox Hill Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. On Wednesday, a medical examiner determined Neely's his death was a homicide. However, that does not mean the case will be prosecuted as a homicide. Okay, that's the stupidest bit of writing I've ever heard. As a murder.
So immediately, just to stop here, I apologize.
I immensely dislike Tim Pool.
We see he's restrained by 3 people, at least 3 people, including a U.S. Marine. I'm a little bit perplexed.
Yeah, so this is kind of really important. Like, if you're being restrained by 3 people, let's say 2 on each arm, you have to be able to use your arm to get out of this particular choke. It's a downward motion from the arm that is forming the triangle. So you have to be able to utilize your arm or tuck your chin in to get out of the choke in the first place. And the only way I can tuck my chin in prior to the choke. And that means I have to be in a headspace where I can know that the choke is coming. And if he's just snuck up on, that's just outright murder.
Because think about like how much space an individual human body takes up, and what it actually means for 3 people on a subway to be restraining somebody. There's not a lot of space here. I'm perplexed as to the needfulness for an arm around his neck in the first place. That seems like an odd decision. That seems like something you would do if you were like the sole person restraining a guy, not if you had like 2+ other people with you.
If you got 3 people restraining a guy, you might need to use that. Like, so I guess, yeah, the implication from this information that it took multiple people to hold this guy down.
I don't necessarily think. I don't think it would have. Let's keep going.
Implies a struggle. Implies this guy was fighting, right? Which is understandable if you're being put in a chokehold.
Guess what? If I'm on your back at the start of a fight, you're already in big trouble. And that's for anyone. You're already in big trouble if you've given someone your back. I pulled up the Army Combatives Manual here. The first basic drill that soldiers are taught when they're taught hand-to-hand combat is a drill designed to take an opponent that is on the ground, that has been put on the ground on their front, and then turn them around, using their own bodies against them, to turn them around and put them on their back, and then to go into this chokehold, into this particular chokehold. It's quickly taught, but it's taught supervised because it's incredibly dangerous.
I would fight too, right?
Potentially, but it seems like what the police are reporting is that he was pacing back and forth and yelling, and then between that and him being restrained, nothing took place. They grouped up on him and restrained him because he was pacing and yelling. It doesn't say there's a fight first. In fact, it says the physical, which makes sense because a guy had his arm around his neck. This guy's clearly unwell. Yeah. He's going to panic. He's not going to think, okay, I'm going to calm down and maybe they'll let me go. That's not going to be his thought process.
No,
I expect. So this sounds like an attack. So, I mean, like, no way around it. Like, he's still behaving massively inappropriately, and he's behaving in an admittedly, let's accept for argument's sake, in an overtly threatening manner. He's got 3 people ganging on him, and he's got one with an arm around his neck in advance of an actual physical altercation. That, to me, sounds like the definition of an attack.
I think it's also difficult when you consider, for instance, just devil's advocate, when you constrain someone successfully, but you're on a subway, what do you then do? Well, it's like sort of when you're in that situation, you've got somebody successfully held down. What do you do when there's nobody, like there's no authorities coming? I think maybe...
You're never that far away on the New York subway from a stop. There's not that many. They're not huge spaces in between them. Especially in Manhattan.
Sort of, there was an aspect of, say, social influence playing it. We've got to keep him constrained until a certain point.
But the key part of this discussion, is it is very possible to constrain someone without putting them in a chokehold.
I take what I take what you're saying, and it makes sense in a context where Neely initiates a physical altercation, wherein he actually attacks other people on the subway. Then at that point, like, you know, their hands are tied, so to speak. They have to respond to an actual, like, physical attack themselves. At which point, okay, now we can leave it up to their judgment. Are they panicking? Like, I can understand that. But if they're initiating the physical altercation, that seems to change the nature of the encounter pretty significantly.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
But do you not think that there's any... I'll just ask you. Do you think there's any situation that would justify a preemptive restraint of someone who has not yet engaged in violence, but there is a reasonable expectation that they will?
If he says
it justifies restraint.
Yeah. If he says
there are indicators that you can use. Police call them pre-assault indicators that tell you whether a person is about to engage in violence. But you, as a regular average Joe citizen on the street, do not necessarily know what these things are. So to you, you don't have the necessary training to be able to say whether one is or is not about to engage in violence. You can't really go by that. by the same token, if you are in that situation and you cannot make those determinations, which most people cannot, uh, if you are in that situation, you cannot make those determinations. Any act you take is an escalation because you don't know whether the situation was about to escalate in the first place.
If he says, I have a weapon and I'm going to hurt you, right?
Well, he did say, I'm going to hurt people on this train.
He did, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he said anything about a weapon, right?
Yeah.
But I think that after those words leave your mouth, people can restrain you, right?
Let's get confirmation on this. Did he? Do we have confirmation exactly on what he
Let
said?
me look at the exact quote. Let me
Please.
find it. Give me a second. You can keep playing it. So. But
Murder,
as
mean. Homicide means death caused by person.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pause it real quick.
Okay.
But like, because I'm seeing people in my chat saying, "Oh, you can't justify killing someone because he was yelling and people were scared." I agree. I don't. Does anyone here think this guy intended to kill Neely? I don't think this was an intentional thing. This doesn't feel intentional.
Look, I gotta say, Wick, I've got no military training whatsoever. If I held someone's neck for 5 minutes, I would expect him to be dead afterwards. So, I don't know. Like, I mean, granted, there is that joke. Like, what do they call 110 IQ in the Marines? A platoon.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Oh.
It doesn't mean criminal.
And again, but anyway, Garen.
So what they're trying to say is...
Did you find that quote?
I'm Googling it right now.
All right.
Though the death was ruled a homicide, it does not mean the case will be prosecuted as a murder. That is up to the Manhattan DA's office, which is investigating. But I suppose I'm probably being a little bit too harsh because you can, they're not being clear here. You can make the argument there's reckless homicide, there's negligent homicide. And so what they're saying is it's not clear that he will be criminally charged. They probably just should have said. They're going to say, as a part of our rigorous ongoing investigation, we'll review the medical examiner's report, assess all available video and photo footage, identify and interview as many witnesses as possible, and obtain additional medical records, read a statement from a spokesperson for the DA. So we've got video coming out of New York. Protesters, I believe this was yesterday, were seen in the streets, and the police made some arrests. And we'll get into it in a little bit, but one of our reporters, Elad Eliyahu, was physically assaulted by one of the protesters and had his property destroyed while he was in the process of doing journalism. But let's just...
I don't know if you can necessarily call anyone working with Tim Pool a reporter.
Let's just get down to brass tacks here, because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of arguments about this one. This is the story of a guy who was having a mental breakdown. I guess the news that recently came out was that he was a subway performer and his mental health collapsed after his, I think his mom was killed, is what they're reporting. And after that, he kind of just lost it. And then he had been arrested 40 times. He had once punched a 6-7-year-old woman in the face. And so as he was belligerent and on the subway, reportedly threatening people, saying that he would take it, he was ready to die and he would hurt people. This is when the three men subdued him.
So here's my go on, please. You found it.
So according to NBC New York, police sources told NBC New York that Neely purportedly told riders on the train that he wanted food, that he wasn't taking no for an answer, and that he would hurt anyone on the train. That's what the...
Okay. Let's assume that all of those things are true. You have an out. You have a situation. Give him $5. Tell him to get a slice at the next stop. You have an out that goes beyond killing him. You have a situation. You have a place to de-escalate to, because he's provided you a place to de-escalate to. And so give him $5. Call up this police, non-emergency, or that's even iffy. Call up some kind of service, and we need more services like this. And that can go help somebody and say, hey, this guy who looks like Michael Jackson might need some help. In the case, assuming the last sentence is correct, I said he's going to hurt people. He said he's going to hurt people. You're justified in calling the police. But the first thing to do is, eat the $5 and send him on his way. Eat the $5 and send him on his way. You will keep people safe if you give the person what they want. It comes down to safety. It comes down to a basic safety thing that you're taught. Like if you're being mugged, give them your wallet, because your wallet is not worth your life. That's the same principle. And then report the mugger afterwards. What you're... A little bit of application of basic sense.
true or not or accurate. I don't know.
So it was a verbal. It was a verbal threat of a stick up for a free lunch, essentially. Okay. Once again, like I'm in this situation where, unless he initiates an actual attack, if this person's just speaking, and frankly, like it doesn't.
I have the NBC nothing about hurting people. Okay, well even then, that's even easier. That's give him $5 and send him on his way.
It doesn't really matter who he is if he's still just speaking, or what he's saying, unless it is something that implies he has the technological capacity to actually like for example, if somebody walks into a bank and says, "I have a firearm," at that point, people are justified in responding to that with a commensurate level of force. If people draw a weapon and they
Okay, but 9 times out of 10, if you're in a bank stick up, what's going to happen is if you draw even saying that and not drawing the firearms is a stupid plan. What's going to happen is the bank teller's going to hit the silent alarm, and you're about 5 minutes away from being intercepted by police when you step out of the bank.
They hold him at gunpoint because he claims he has a gun or a bomb. Makes sense. If we're talking about a homeless guy saying, "Hey, I'm gonna get violent unless I get food," or something like that, you can get up and you can tell him to back down. You can hell, you know what? Even if at a certain point, if he persisted, they threw him off the subway, that'd be one thing. Putting him into like grabbing him from behind around the neck prior to any kind of physical altercation taking place. It's very difficult to justify that, and the conjecture by other passengers that he might become more violent later on if they didn't do something like that doesn't strike me as adequate in that particular case. And one of the things that's kind of bothering me about kind of front loading this person's criminal history is that would lend to my giving credence to somebody claiming that this person was acting in an unruly manner, and maybe even in a threatening manner. That it seems to be used to say, well, this is the only way this person could have been dealt with.
I don't think that I don't think the passengers knew his criminal
well
history.
precisely, and that's my point.
I always set that aside, but given the fact that, again, they don't know this guy is, they know, right, quote unquote, that there have been attacks on the subway, that this is happening, right, that this is a dangerous place to be and it's getting more dangerous, right, in that atmosphere.
I don't think that's justified. Take that logic and extend it out to anything. Our perception of what's dangerous does not necessarily correlate with what's actually dangerous. That's kind of half the battle here. So if I think something is dangerous and it's not actually dangerous, and that doesn't, for example, correlate to crime stats, you're putting yourself in a situation where a highly partisan media environment is informing you of what actions you're capable of taking, right? So follow along on the rich rewards. Suppose you're in the city of Chicago, which is a very common conservative target to talk about the murder rate in Chicago. And Chicago has a gun violence problem for sure, but it does not nearly have the problem. The stats do not nearly suggest that the situation is as dire as Fox News or OAN is going to claim. So if you walk into, suppose you're going for a trip from Kentucky to Chicago, and you carry in Kentucky and it's reciprocal, and you can carry in Chicago, for example, and that's also a falsehood that your gun laws in Chicago are significantly more restrictive than the rest of the state. Simply hasn't been true for over a decade now. If you walk into that situation and assuming that you're going to see violence and that you can take action immediately to stem that violence, you are going to cause violence. Because you have been primed to believe that you are under threat by being in this place. We are not good, as a rule, we aren't good at this kind of thing. It's why war zones have officers to evaluate situations. because people are not necessarily great at doing that spur of the moment, and it requires a system to keep it from getting out of hand. We do not want to deputize every citizen to act out and commit violence when they feel threatened. It's not a good way to exist. It's going to be rife for abuse to begin with, and even if it's not rife for abuse, it breaks down the cohesion of society because there has to be a certain level of me being able to sit down in a restaurant and not assume that you're going to jump up and kill me because I give you the heebie-jeebies.
Fear, and in that context where there was 26 people pushed on the train tracks, right, and in things in New York subway system, right, in the last year or something. I think that's the statistic. But given that,
If you're going to make that argument, Wick, you better have the statistic to hand, particularly as you do this all the time.
sense, and you see this guy comes in and starts threatening people, I give them a little more grace. I think it's reasonable to restrain someone in that situation. It's like, okay, buddy, right?
Okay, but where was Jordan Neely's grace?
We're going to restrain you. Now, whether they should have used a chokehold or not, different story. But I think restraint, I see no issue with that, the initial restraining.
Well, unless
I don't think that's an issue.
unless by restraining they initiate a physical altercation, out of which there might not have been one whatsoever. Trying to restrain this person, and additionally in the manner they did, somebody ended up dead. It's distinctly possible, had they simply verbally or stood up to the person or maybe walled him off, everybody would have left that subway all right. We don't know. They jumped the gun, unfortunately.
Yes, yeah, I do agree with you on that. I think that there was, at least based on what we know so far, the sense that a crucial step was just completely missed, and that of sort of communicating with him and like trying to talk to him and engage with him.
Honorably discharged. Okay. I was just checking out of curiosity.
About the things that he was saying, for instance. I think this is clearly somebody, or was somebody, who was clearly suffering great mental health crisis, long term. And I think in moments like that, you sort of need somebody to just hear you. And I think sort of that
This is a pretty reasonable position from Gidology. There are things which I would take her to task over, but this isn't one of them.
preemptive ear, and I think a lot of social paranoia now probably influence this idea of just doing the physical. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Not Brooks with the $5. Thank you. Correct take. It was murder in public over 15 minutes period. Well, I'm leaning.
Yes.
leaning
Thank you
that
so
direction.
much for the $10, MJ. MJ says, so if I come across Karen or Ken in a threatening, verbally abusive manner, am I now to use vigilantes tactics, or do we still believe in law and order?
Some people might chat saying like, well, if someone's scared, are you justified to kill them? I mean, depends, right? If someone threatens you and you try to stop them, and within that struggle,
I would really like the internet to work properly. It would be great.
you stop them and they die, right? That's tragic. That's unfortunate. That doesn't make you a murderer. That just, unfortunately, is what happens, right? Because I don't want to live in a world where I can't defend myself. If someone is attacking me, I reserve the right to stop them.
But we're not talking about you being attacked. We're talking about before you're attacked. So do I have the right to preemptively attack someone prior to them attacking me? Like, this is a huge can of worms in personal interaction.
Using whatever force, the least amount of force I possibly can. And if things go wrong, right, it's tragic. And if I was negligent, I should be held responsible. But that's the question. Was this negligence? It sounds like probably if he held him for that long, that's negligence. But just in general, if someone threatens and says, "I'm going to come to your," if they're
Let's just clear this the fuck up. Stop. Bad computer. A proper just work.
they're in my face, if they're like in person with me and they're shouting in my face how they're going to hurt me, I reserve the right to stop them from hurting me before they hurt me. Sure. I don't need to take that punch to the face, right? I can stop.
If you're this concerned about this, then you need to be studying martial arts and learn basic defense, like a basic block. If that is going to be your stance, then it should be incumbent upon you to avail yourself of some form of martial art that teaches you a basic block.
Stop them before that happens, and I think that's imminently.
Oh yeah, and if they get in your face, you can shove them away. You can even possibly punch them, and you can start to remove yourself from the situation. The issue I'm having here is we're not talking about an altercation that developed between somebody standing up to this person in the front. We're talking about an altercation that was triggered by this person being restrained from the back by somebody with his arms around his neck. Now, at that point, the ability to communicate with this person is obviously being a little bit impeded. You can't negotiate or talk down somebody that you have in a chokehold. It doesn't work that way.
Sure, and like, again, I'm not defending this guy using the chokehold.
You seem to be, though, a little bit. Like, we are gonna speed this up, by the way, because
defending the restraint in general, right? But again, even if it's not threatening me, like if I was on the train and I'll be real, I'm 5'8". I'm not very tall. I'm not very strong. If I see some big dude, right, threatening someone else on the train, yelling at them, screaming in their face how they're going to hurt them, I think that's okay to use a little more force to put them down, right? To restrain them. Even if I'm not being directly threatened. If you see something...
Come on. Come back.
Say something, right? If you see something, do something. It's the same. I don't want to be the bystander who just sits on my phone, takes out and records it while someone gets hurt, right? So again, I think in this specific instance, the guy is probably negligent because, again, he should not have held the chokehold for that long at all. But I think initially it was fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm just comparing this to a situation that I had a few years ago. I was on the underground and there was a man he was homeless. I spoke to him afterwards after we got off the subway, and he was on the subway with all of us, well, actually on the train. And throughout the journey, for an hour-long journey, he was shouting and raving basically about how much he hated white British people and reflecting on the fact that Mussolini was crucified, interestingly, just like Jesus was, and nobody bats an eyelid and all these sorts of things. And people were clearly uncomfortable, but in that...
This is an everyday occurrence in Chicago. I don't know why we would, if like this is something that happened to you once on the underground, you're doing great. Wick said he was in the Air Force at the beginning of the video.
Entire journey, nobody did anything. And I would say nobody did anything because he didn't threaten anybody directly. He was just angry. He was upset. He wanted people to hear him. He just felt ignored. And then when we got off the train, I spoke to him and that was all fine, and he was
serving in the military is no guarantee of maturity.
Okay. And I think the important thing was that he didn't say that he didn't care if he went to jail, that he was willing to essentially give up his life. I think that's what kept people sort of fearful, but not necessarily needing to act upon that fear in order to protect the
So,
people on board.
Meat Wallet for $5 asks you both an interesting question. How often do the three of you encounter belligerent homeless people in your day-to-day lives? Daily, weekly, monthly? Again, I live in rural America, so not very often, but I have lived in cities like in California.
Guess what, Wick? I am willing to bet you that you don't look hard enough for him. I passed yesterday in the middle of rural Colorado and saw a tent. A tent in a copse of vegetation that was a homeless person camping out. So they're everywhere. You just have to look a little better. We just do a good job of hiding them in rural America.
California, I lived in Monterey, right, for a while. I've lived in Wichita. I've lived in New Jersey before. In New Jersey, it happened all the time, every day almost. Like they would come up to me and yell, beg. Sometimes got violent. In a couple cases, I told you guys how I lost this tooth, right? Right.
Okay. Very common occurrence in Chicago all the time. I can't count. There was one guy in the neighborhood when I lived in Lakeview, Boys Town. He drove through the late at night, 10, 11, 12. He went on his bike, and never was this guy all there, because he always came with this particular story about how he was going to be thrown in jail if he didn't get to work on time, and he didn't have money for the train or the bus, and same story every time. So after you encounter this guy 4 or 5 times, you just kind of roll with it. And like, here's what you do. You listen. If you got the time, at the very least, you listen, you apologize and say, I can't help you, and move on.
Like, these 2 front teeth are fake. I got pistol whipped, right? I was mugged. I don't know if the guy was homeless, but it was in a city, right? And the guy approached me, started getting in my face, and then pop, took my wallet, my money. So it's not zero, but yeah, I live.
Okay,
in a
but question for you then. A question for you then. So in advance of him pistol whipping you, suppose Big Burly Sunday in his Marine getup came up behind him and put him into a chokehold and held him there for 5+ minutes until he died.
No, you shouldn't have killed him, right?
Should I have walked up behind him and put him into a chokehold?
He passed out, and after 30 seconds or a minute, you stopped. Hooray!
Anyone in chat who can get me some kind of artwork of Sunday as a Marine would be appreciated.
Right?
Okay, but at this point in time, we're literally just dealing with mentally ill people who have been completely neglected by the society,
but
acting as you would expect them to do so.
The people don't know it's
no,
just
I
a mentally ill person, right?
I understand this, but they don't know it's otherwise either. And in advance of any like escalation taking place where you're actually facing down the person, you are literally just picking out someone based upon your independent judgment. This person looks spooky, and deciding to escalate it immediately to action that can only have like 2 outcomes: either the person is severely injured or dead, or you are.
They look spooky, right?
Just spooky, because in this particular situation, we are at a point where he has not aggressed on anyone.
I have people in my chat wanting me to bring on Brooks, but of course, like you two are both.
I don't know who Brooks is.
Brooks is a friend of the channel. It'll be interesting. I can say that it will not be TOS. But I leave that.
Yes, absolutely, Nick. It is designed to be lethal. This needs to work properly. I'm going to be calling the internet company probably this week.
It's your decision, both of you.
I'm okay with whatever. It's up to Kidology.
Don't mind.
Okay. All right. Okay, Brooks, you got 10 minutes, okay?
Well, are you asking the question, Sunday?
Oh, did you want to answer, please?
No, do you want to answer?
Oh, do I want to answer the question?
Wasn't it for all of us to answer?
How often do the 3 of you encounter belligerent homeless people in your day-to-day life?
Probably on a weekly basis or so. Victoria has a fairly severe homelessness problem. Affordable housing is not available, almost categorically.
Well, no, even setting that out. Like I took a look at before you got here, Nick. I took a look at the Marine Corps Combatives Manual, or Semper Fu, whatever the hell the Marine calls it. I don't particularly care enough to learn the. They have wrist locks. They teach wrist locks. They teach arm bars. All of these things will subdue you without causing death. And I absolutely know that the Army teaches arm bars. I've been in them. So, like, there are options. Let's assume that this man is trained to a minimal level of competence. He had more options than chokehold. And
there's almost like no mental support for a lot of these people. It's bad. And I'll encounter people fairly regularly who will like walk down the street and they'll yell at you and stuff like that. And it's These are not people who should be left to their own devices without any like normal resources on the street.
What do you mean not left to their own devices? Do you think they should be forcibly institutionalized?
I'll tell low blow wick.
In some cases, possibly. In a lot of cases, we're dealing with people who are dealing with severe addiction issues. We're dealing with people who are sleeping on like benches and things like that, and they are given no financial support, basically whatsoever. And there's no way out. It becomes, you know, like situations like this become almost inevitable. You're putting people into a situation that is essentially unlivable, and not like people who are sort of equipped to adjust to that kind of situation. Like it's a spiral of destruction at that point. These are not people who have the wherewithal to get out by themselves. They should be given housing assistance and getting off of whatever they're addicted to and things like that. And our attempts at providing that have been incredibly lackluster. So, okay, well, I will bring in Brooks and give me 1 second.
Just send him a link and have him jump back.
I'll answer the question while Brooke comes in.
Please.
Because it's interesting what you're saying. At least where I live, it's very different. I encounter homeless people every single day. We have a huge homeless population in Cambridge, but I know everyone. Like you sort of know everybody by face or by name. And I think it's because, firstly, well, if you squat, there's lots of empty houses around Cambridge because it's so expensive. And if you squat, you can legally squat. So it's attractive in that sense. There's also a council estate, which does a lot of drugs just up the road from me. And that attracts a lot of people. But we also don't have guns and not much sort of physical violence beyond sort of drunk squabbling. So I think that at least keeps the up the appearance that the homeless population here is not violent. And definitely I don't feel unsafe when I go walking at like 2 a.m. or anything like that. It is sort of just what it is at the moment, especially. So it's interesting. We also have initiatives where there's...
All right. I'm going to put a poll up real quick for everybody. Who looks more like Rasputin, Brooks or Wick?
This newspaper called The Big Issue, which homeless individuals can sell and keep the money that they get from these papers. And you just have to basically pick them up from a homeless shelter, which we have, which distributes food and everything. You can sell.
No, Pippa, homeless people in the USA typically do not have guns. Homeless people have a ridiculously hard time holding on to their belongings in the first place.
And so a lot of people do that. And so there's a black market of bicycles.
I think, I think one of the issues, right, that happens in this conversation, and not just this conversation, but in conversations about these topics, is depending on where you live, both based on both country and like region, right, you're going to have remarkably different experiences with homeless individuals, right?
Well, that's actually a really good point, Nick. For most times when you're putting someone in a chokehold, the chokehold is not going to be so. Like when you're taught this, when I was taught this, my combatives instructor pointed out that the chokehold is not a chokehold until you close the triangle. You take the triangle that you form for the choke. In this case, it's like this, and you roll your shoulders back. No, stop. Sorry. But at this point, you've taken the triangle that you formed and you've made it tighter. And this is what constricts the blood flow and why it's called the blood choke. If I put you in the beginning part of that chokehold successfully, I can keep you there almost indefinitely, particularly if I'm at your back, without necessarily completing the choke and cutting off blood to your brain. Like, it's very possible to do. Like, it's very easy to control someone from their back. It's very easy because you've engaged both their arms at that point too. Like, even from a rear naked choke, there are options.
My experience with them in Wichita was remarkably different than my experience with them in New Jersey, which was remarkably different than my experience with them in California. In California, they weren't really a big issue, right? For me, at least for me personally, I never really, I would give them money sometimes or raincoats. Like I had these raincoat pouches, these $2, you can get them for $2. And when it was raining and stuff, I passed them out, right? But didn't really have an issue with them. But in Jersey, it was absolutely an issue, and it was absolutely scary, right? I was afraid, right? In many cases, so.
Yeah, and I think with that, I mean, there's a little bit of frustration I have definitely watching. So Surprisingly, not with kidology. The idea, the general warmth with like, hey, maybe we should take a second look. The being out in public thing, I think, comes first. We have an entire society in America, and it's very different than the UK. I was just out in London. The tubes, very different beast. I was in New York literally 3 weeks ago. Very different beast than New York. LA, in theory, has a subway. I've ridden it. I know it exists. But the reality of public transit in any of these cities, or even dealing with people by walking down a street, people in, say, Europe do that. You walk down the street. We don't do that. We walk from our car into Starbucks. We smile, we wave, we go back in. Maybe at Walmart, we have to talk to a greeter. We find it funny, we make jokes. But in the real world, just as a little bit of a background of my, I'm going to say credit here. I lived at 6th and Folsom for a decade in San Francisco, which, if you want to talk about homelessness, kind of a good example of where exactly the big problem in San Francisco is, the heart of the Tenderloin. We had multiple guys, I got to know their first names. We would have beers and cigarettes on my front step because that's how you do it when people are living literally on your house. You have to do this. You talk to people as though they're human. You deal with the unhoused like people, not just as this massive homelessness. In Los Angeles, I lived at Fairfax and Melrose.
That was kind of the approach. Like what Brooks is talking about here is kind of the approach I took in Chicago, because the way you live in Chicago is you don't really live in the city so much as you live in neighborhoods. Bubba, you're fine. Go lay down. So much as you live in neighborhoods, and like you see the same people every day. So like there is a sense of community that exists quite beyond this described isolation that some people talk about cities where they don't know anybody, because you're in a neighborhood and you see people every day, and that includes the people who are wandering through who are homeless or living in the area who are homeless. When I used to drive, I had a 2 hour a day commute when I used to work for the electric company in Chicago to get to my office, and there was a particular overpass to get on the expressway where I would go and get on that overpass. And every once in a while, there'd be the exact same homeless person in a wheelchair going opposite traffic in the middle of the road. You know who these people are. You see them all the time. And what they need to be is treated like people. Because you know what's happening could happen to you. You're not that far away from homelessness at any given time.
Ish. More towards the Hollywood side than anything. If you watch the BLM riots, the Adidas store that almost burned down was right around the corner from me. Super fun times. The unhoused there, you dealt with, and they are generally mentally deeply unwell, very sick or exceptionally poor. Most unhoused just live in their cars, and that's it. The mentally unwell walk around. They're free range, as you might say. And in New York, while I was there, almost every other ride, there was someone who was absolutely not in the best space, screaming, yelling, doing all these things. Didn't see a murder, not one time, because most people who have to deal with humans every day, and you get on the tube, you get on the subway, you get on the bus, whatever it is, you walk down the street, you know there's a different tolerance you have for shit. People who live way out in the middle of fucking nowhere, and this is the reason the discourse around this is completely fucked in America. Anyone who's suburban doesn't understand this at all. I know, I grew up in Littleton, Colorado.
Yeah, but the problem is that even if you don't necessarily live, not that many people in America live urban or live rural. It's like 20% of the population.
Famous shithole suburb that is this problem. People don't talk. So when we talk about this, I really find it just utter.
Yeah, Littleton is by Denver, and that entire area is weird. Every time I visited, it's not the same. Like the sense of community isn't in Denver the way it is in other cities. I can't pick out discernible. Like in Chicago, I always know where I'm at because like people very proudly display banners for the neighborhoods. Like there's a sense of community, and like people say I live in Lakeview, or I live in East Lakeview, or I live in Gold Coast, or I live in a neighborhood, and they're proud of it. And even people who live in neighborhoods that are traditionally thought of as bad are proud of their neighborhood and very proud of being part of that community. And I haven't seen that in other places that I've been or lived in to the same degree. Like it's one of the things, like people who live in Chicago tend to gel with their communities, and like we are involved in helping one another and being there. Like it's much more, it's a much different experience, I think, than what a lot of people experience in a lot of cities. And that helps grease the wheels as far as it's concerned with operating around people who might not necessarily always act in the way you expect. And like 10 years I lived there, and I saw one crime ever, and it was almost right when I left. And it was but for the grace of God go I type stuff. So Like I think that's definitely something to consider. Is the sense like rural is got very tight. You have a very tight knit rural community, but once they go out into the world, they seem almost afraid. And suburbs, just don't even get me started on suburbs. No one in the suburbs is really that well situated to talk with one another. The only reason I know half of my neighbors right now is because I know their dogs.
Clearly distasteful and kind of gross wick that just a few weeks ago you were having a discussion and saying things like, hey, we want to have a public comments and marketplace event, like we were talking about this, and literally people yelling is like, well, maybe he was being a bit threatening. As soon as it becomes something that's a little louder.
This is a fucking really weird way to phrase this. It wasn't he was just yelling. He was yelling, I'm going to hurt people.
No, he wasn't.
He absolutely, according to the police report.
No, the police report said he threatened the people on the car.
He wanted food, he wasn't taking no for an answer, and that he would hurt anyone on the train. He didn't care if he got a life sentence.
You mean someone who's crazy yelling on a train? Yeah, that literally, by the way, you described like 2 p.m. in Manhattan. You're not describing a unique incident by any meaningful stretch of the imagination. So how many people do you want murdered? Let me just ask that. Are you okay with more people being murdered?
Right, to hurt other people.
But he didn't do that.
Should be restrained.
Okay, restrained in a chokehold by a Marine and his 2 buddies, preemptively before they did anything. Just someone who's yelling.
Threatening someone?
But he didn't threaten anyone specifically. He was yelling in general. Yeah?
That's a threat. Yes?
No, not in the context of a New York City subway.
Someone coming up to your face and says, I'm going to hurt you is not a threat. That's what you're saying.
We've just moved the goalposts here. Because, like, if someone is hurting you, then you have a right to defend yourself. Okay, but no one was being hurt. Yes, but they're threatening. That's not the same thing. More to the point, people say things all the time. All the time they say things about what's going on. I got to check my hotspot, too, to make sure I still have battery. I do. We're good. Okay. People say things all the time that are passionate or like let's flip this around and take another situation. You see a couple arguing on the street, and one of the people in the couple shouts, "I'm going to kill you." Do you have the right to intervene at that point? Would you intervene at that point when it's very clearly that's not the same thing as freedom of speech? I wouldn't put this out to freedom of speech, but it's very clearly an intimate argument. And people are shouting at one another, most people aren't going to intervene because you feel a natural aversion to wanting to get involved in those situations. We checked earlier, Nick. Pippa pulled up the article in question, and no, it didn't appear that he threatened anyone. He simply demanded food and said he wouldn't take no for an answer, which makes it worse because now we have a very easy place to go and de-escalate the situation. Like, give him money for food. If you're that afraid and you've just been given an out, why not take it? Why resort to violence?
Pretty sure that's not what happened.
Okay. Well,
I'm just saying.
Deal with you right
like
now.
You're being deeply specific now. It went from he threatened the people on the train to he threatened you specifically.
I'm going to hurt. It doesn't have to be you specifically. It could be like, I'm going to hurt people. If he comes up to you,
you mean a mentally crazy person on the subway?
I'm going to hurt people, and you're going to do nothing.
I mean, yes, on the subway. Yeah. I mean, you can kind of gauge whether or not someone's serious or what's happening. Yes, you can do this. You can not do a thing. You can watch. You can watch as people get off at the next stop very often, move between trains very often, move away from.
Physically hurt.
Yes. Yes.
So have I. Right.
Good.
I wish to God someone had stopped that interaction. Right. I wish to God someone had put that guy in a chokehold. Right. I'd still have my teeth. It'd be nice. It'd be nice. Right. This is a pretty privileged position you're taking.
So
you can just ignore when people make these.
Holy shit, Wick! No. Oh no, it's not a privileged position. This is how we interact with people day to day. If you live in a city, it's basic city etiquette.
I mean, that's fine.
We're talking about someone who was murdered. We're literally talking about someone who was murdered, preemptively being attacked.
He was killed. That's a different thing.
I don't know. I watched the video. 15 minutes of a chokehold.
You may very well have been.
Really?
You may very well have been.
15 minutes of the chokehold.
More information comes out, because I've heard 15 minutes. I've also heard 2. I've also heard 6. I've also heard 3. I don't know. So
we have 2. Just for a point of clarification,
Oh.
we have 2 minutes on footage.
Okay.
And he's not responsive. We don't have footage, for example, of him being belligerent.
Like I said, this guy was grossly negligent. Now, whether it translates to murder, whether there was intent, is something the courts can decide, and I wish they would. And if there was intent, and they do find enough evidence, then convict him, throw him in jail. He murdered someone.
I love how much room we give people to kill a person on the subway in public who wasn't being attacked or doing anything.
Actually, here, I got an excellent question for the whole panel, okay? What if this didn't take place in the subway? What if this took place in the home of Steven Crowder after he said, I'm going to fuck you up to his wife? And the manservant or whatever, who for whatever reason was not on dog medicine duty that day, jumped up behind Steven Crowder and choked him to death. Not trained, he didn't know how long it would take, but choked him to death. Would the situation remain the same?
It would be very similar in nature, yeah.
Could you elaborate?
Okay.
Oh, gee, now, I don't think. I think Rick is doubling down to double down here.
Cool. I'm good here.
I mean,
Thank you, Sunday, for having me on. It's been lovely.
I didn't have you. Hey, look, I didn't have you on. You're
Hey,
Wick
no,
server.
I-
This is
the
Wick's
chat
doing.
paid money for me to come on here.
No.
and-
The chat paid money for me to bring you on, but Wick brought you on.
That's fair. Thank you for having me, Wick. It was
no
horrifying.
problem. Like, you're cool with people like getting threatened. That's nice to know that people can go around just threatening, and you're just gonna say, "Well, butter up, buckle up, Buttercup. Just bend over and take it." Because if they say they can threaten you, that's okay by me.
Well, Wick's never. Wick's,
And they threaten you. You can't do anything about it. You just have to take it. That's a great stance. That's a great way to be. I'm glad you're like that, right? That's really great. It's a very privileged position.
Wick is never going to accept a guest invite by me.
He is being tried for manslaughter, if I recall.
Again, so I do appreciate that you made the most out of it.
Content. Like, I would
But
have
his
him on
content
if
is
he wanted to stay. You know what? I feel a little bad, right? Taking him through the ringer like that, but I'll do it all day. Kidology, please.
Yeah. I just have somebody in my chat who says that, called Honey. It says, I live in New York City and take the subway all the time. I took it today, and it is unique that they yell out, I'm going to hurt people. So I think, sort of anecdotally, it's quite...
Oh, we have video footage. Use the video footage. Jesus Christ.
Seems quite exceptional, according to Honey, who takes the subway daily. So, just in support of what you were saying, Wick.
Sure. Like, again, I don't live in New York City. I don't. So I can only go on what other people tell me. And again, as I said at the beginning, if I get information that this is just, like, from a credible source, to be clear, that this is, that the circumstances change, my opinion will change. Because, again, I am not justifying what this man did. I am saying, on a conceptual level, that it is okay, under certain conditions, to preemptively defend yourself if you are threatened.
Okay, so I've got people in my chat saying threats are not violence. Threats are violence, to be clear, but that doesn't give you carte blanche to use any kind of escalation of violence in retaliation. So, dear friends, we are an hour and a half into the stream. We are 8 minutes into the video. let's press on.
Look, we like to talk. Go ahead.
And very quickly, Robin Page, thank you for the $10. Not murder, but negligent homicide, because the initial restraint might have been justified, but the method used was not, and the Marine knew or should have known better. I agree with that.
Fondue for $10. Fondue for $10. The reason these things don't work is because addicts want to stay addicted. How do you feel about having buildings that allow people to keep taking drugs, but they can't leave unless they're clean? Not sure what this has to do with.
This has to do with safe injection sites. It actually does have to do with the conversation, but it's probably a bit complicated.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, Jesus. So, if we're going to get into that, I'm going to skip ahead because it's not pertinent to this discussion.
Rabbit hole. I got more. $5 from Champering Steam Tech. Thanks for hosting interesting ideas, Wick. You're welcome. And yeah, thank you. So that's what I got.
And Kid, if you have any to respond to as well.
No, my chat's been...
Conversation. Show her some love. Okay, let's press on.
Reportedly, the Marine told everyone to call 911 and get the police down there, and then he ended up dying, which has resulted in the left, like AOC, whether or not people, I don't know if you consider her left, but AOC...
Yeah, she's progressive.
She said this was a public murder. And now you got protesters calling for this guy to be arrested. They're saying he committed a murder, and I think this is actually a really good example of what is described as anarcho-tyranny, in that you had 25 people pushed on subway tracks in the past year. You've had like a woman get raped on a train in Philadelphia, and we don't hear a single peep from any of these politicians, from any of these activists, until someone actually stops the guy. If you go back,
okay, and here's the perverseness of this for me. Okay, we are not for some reason counting this as an example of that. We are dealing with a Marine who appears to be waiting and ready to strangle someone as soon as they behave in an unruly manner on a train.
I mean, like,
but this isn't like a case of subway violence.
Waiting for this. I don't know. Maybe he has, but I don't have enough information to say. So.
Yeah.
We do. Like, okay. Second thing, you might have noticed that I have pulled up here 2 United States military training documents. Most of these documents are available for free. You can go and look, and you can get the context of what he's going to be trained to do. I love that they describe it as react to contact. I think this is an update. Yeah, this is an update from when I learned the book. That's hilarious. Oh, this is exactly what I was talking about before. But yeah, like we don't have to sit around here blindly talking about what was this guy equipped to do or not, because we know.
Thank you for the super chat.
Sure. Yeah. So when someone is being violent and then someone else acts in self-defense of others and the person dies in the process, now there's all of a sudden calls for, okay, so this guy should be criminally charged, but there was no call for stopping the 25 people being pushed on subway tracks. That's an ongoing and acceptable thing.
I'm never going to sit here and try to defend people pushing people on subway tracks.
Okay. Who is not calling for the reduction of crime? Everyone is calling for the reduction of crime. Hey, Alice. No one is saying, oh, it's okay that people are committing crimes. We're just also saying that this crime was not acceptable.
That's a crime. Like, that's terrible.
That's a murder.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if they die. So that's horrible. No one's going to be on the other side of that argument. But in terms of like the guy who just got killed, isn't, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, doesn't in self-defense the proportionality of what you're doing has to be in response to the actual aggressive actions of the person, right? It has to be proportional. Is that correct? So you feel in your mind that it was a proportional response for him to choke him out to death in that situation because he was going to become such a threat to the person who choked him out.
You made a big leap right there.
What's the leap?
You're ascribing intent to the Marine to kill.
Oh, I'm not saying he intended to kill him. I never said that, but he did end up killing him, right?
So that's
Christ. Well, Tim Pool is what's the word I'm looking for? Tim Pool is just to the right of the Kaiser, despite the fact that he tries to claim he's not. So I wouldn't necessarily take anything he says at face value.
The argument, or you make
yes, I'm asking you that because is what he did proportional to the threat?
Yes.
So
I don't like the proportionality argument. By the way, you guys can tell me to keep going or to pause whenever.
No, well, look, again, I think initially it was proportional, or at least I could see. Again, I didn't. We don't know what happened before exactly. We don't have video of what happened before. I think
this might need to be relitigated with the people who know what the hell they're talking about.
the police may or may not. I'm not sure. I know they have more footage than what has been released. But if he was violently threatening people, yes, he should initially have been restrained. When it becomes improportional, when it becomes too much, was when he held that for as long as he did. And that's where I think, okay, the line was crossed.
I'm sorry, let's keep going.
Negligence, probably.
Yeah, and I think when the other two individuals sort of came on board, I mean, that just felt like sort of a social influence mentality, and I think a lot of adrenaline probably running through. I just got a question from somebody. Thank you for the super chat, MJ, again. MJ asked, so if other riders on the subway jumped to go against the other good doers and unalive them, would they be perceived as heroes as well if they stop somebody from being harmed?
Well, now we're in like that's a really good question actually, and that's a distinct possibility as well. Now we're in like Kyle Rittenhouse territory, where we have in the dark somebody with a gun. He's been chased by one guy.
Why? Actually, I brought this up earlier, so I don't think it's that bad a point.
I don't know what provoked the initial chasing. Maybe nothing. He shoots him, and now he's being pursued by other protesters in the crowd. Is he being like are they not at that point responding to somebody who has made precisely that same threat? Much more manifest, by the way. Like he's actually shot someone at close range in the head. I don't think the people in that riot, of course, had no video footage to clarify who the aggressor was. They just see a guy running with a rifle in the dark in the street. There's at least one body on the ground. Indeed, he killed one other person who was responding in kind. We don't tend to treat that other person in the same manner as as like some of us are treating the Marine in this case. We're treating the Marine in this case as if his hands are simply clean just because he did that to the right person.
Well, I don't think the rioters, right? None of them would or should be charged because you're exactly right in their perception.
I object to calling them rioters.
From their perception, they saw a guy got shot, and they were chasing after the guy that shot him. I don't think there's anything morally wrong with that. But the question becomes, right? Do we want to charge someone for making a call that a reasonable person would have made, but ended up being wrong, right? So a reasonable person who sees someone shoot another person, we got to stop the shooter, right? They don't know the situation. They don't know that it was in self-defense. They don't know any of that.
I'd also point out, while we're talking about Karl Rittenhouse, that Karl Rittenhouse's situation and the response of the protesters to Karl Rittenhouse is exactly why most people who are involved in public safety don't want everyone running around with guns, because that exact situation is going to happen. Guy shoots protester. Other protesters assume that this guy is a shooter attacking the protest. At that point, you're in that precisely the point. The right will say Kyle Rittenhouse is a good guy with a gun, and from the perspective of the people sitting there right now, watching their fellow protesters get shot, watching their fellow protesters get shot, that's not a good guy with a gun. So, like, this idea around vigilantism is a matter of perspective, particularly if you have an environment where people are being put at odds with one another.
We can infer that a reasonable person would want to stop the shooter, right? And so we don't charge them for stopping the shooter. So if the rioters had come, found Rittenhouse, and beat him up, they shouldn't have been charged either. Now, this isn't
No. Okay, suppose the rioters had gone and run over Rittenhouse and beat the crap out of him. Then at that point, they absolutely should be charged, because that's not proportional force to the matter. If I take away Rittenhouse's gun and put him in an armbar, for example, that's proportional force. That stops the threat. This is completely insane.
We want to encourage or valorize, right? This isn't something I wouldn't call anyone in this case a good guy, right? But at the same time,
So here's the
punishment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Here's the
Does that make
problem. There are two immediate problems with that approach. It's the problem with this proportionate approach generally, this emphasis on proportionality. First of all, it is extremely easy for someone to rationalize literally anybody being a threat. Like, for example, let's say by some severely unfortuitous sequence of events, I ended up trapped on a desert island with Destiny. We had a limited amount of food. I can reasonably conjecture, based on what I know about this person, that if we run out of food and it's a choice between death and eating me, he will eat me first. Therefore, am I entitled to preemptively...
In fairness, if I was trapped on a deserted island with Destiny, I would build a boat very quickly and then drown him. No, I wouldn't do that, but, you know, Christ. That's a horrible example, because Destiny has demonstrated that he is manipulative and very willing to abuse people to get his own way.
Kill him. No, I don't think that's reasonable at all. Additionally, like, judging someone as threatening bleeds very easily into kind of a post-hoc rationalization for excessive action or excessive force. So in this particular case, we actually...
Which happens all the time in America with police shootings, by the way.
Have not even entertained the idea that there's a threshold between him putting his arm around his neck and like him engaging in some escalation of whatever it was he was doing. We're sort of treating it as if as soon as this person engages in any kind of threatening action, that gives carte blanche to anybody else in the subway to do essentially whatever they want to him. So long as it doesn't last for a long period of time.
Sunday. No, again, had the first response for this guy to pull out a gun and shoot Neely, yeah, like, whoa, dude, you just shot a guy. What are you doing, right? Like,
where
that's
are you
entirely
setting the line
inappropriate, right?
here?
But I think that there is, like, chokeholds, while dangerous, aren't necessarily fatal, right? You can do it, and if you do it properly, it works and it's safe. The problem is...
what if somebody shot him? What if instead of a chokehold?
That would be murder. Because of proportionality, right?
But hang on.
But a chokehold has the same effect as shooting someone. Jesus Christ.
This person, you don't know if he doesn't have a weapon, right? You know how like it is no guarantee. As if you watch like any cop videos that talk about like the dangers of attempting like de-escalation when someone's approaching you fast. There is no guarantee that your shots will even bring the person down in time for something like a knife to not kill you. Things like hats can have razor blades in them. Right? A well-placed punch or a shoot, like it doesn't take a lot to kill a person. People are simultaneously remarkably durable and remarkably fragile.
Yeah, but probability comes into play here. Like, yes, you can die from a single punch, but it's vanishingly rare that you will die from a single punch. It's possible. It's just not likely.
It's remarkably
stabbed
common.
in the neck. It's much more probable that you will die, and therefore it allows for a greater amount of force to stop that individual as quickly as possible. I think that at the end of the day, while post hoc you can justify, and there is some issues with it, it comes down to, do we want to go by results based or do we want to go by principle based? Now,
no, it does. It's not. It's a very solid set of actions. It's all results, and it's all what you are equipped to do. And like the idea behind having a state which is a monopoly on violence is that the state also knows how to use that violence. Like that's the idea that we're trying to go for. So trying to pretend that it's not, this is wrong. Like,
the result-based being, like, results-based thinking is like, I did an action, it resulted in this result, therefore that action was good or bad. I don't know if that's true. I don't like that way of thinking.
Well,
right? I could jump off a cliff and I could survive, but that doesn't mean my decision to jump off the cliff was a good one.
Or sure, but by the same token, I think good principles will take results into account. So, for example, if in this particular
Leo's gonna go nuts with this video.
Case, the Marine had punched the guy because he had told him to back down, and he got into his face, and he knocked his head on the ground in the wrong way, and he died. We'd be having a similar conversation, but it would be significantly different. We'd be talking about somebody who had somebody really close up in his face, and at a certain level, at a certain psychological level, some kind of action was compelled. There was a point at which the Marine lost, or the ex-Marine or whatever he was, lost his freedom to gauge the situation and respond thoughtfully and with meditated upon intent. As soon as you have somebody coming up behind somebody, that's a different question. He is the initiator. So I don't think like the chokehold itself categorically counts as self-defense when it's from behind and the other guy hadn't actually initiated an attack.
Again, categorically no, but again, was he in someone else's face? Then I think restraining him was like. So what if he didn't chokehold? What if they three guys just tackled this dude to the ground? Okay.
That probably would have been unwise anyways. That probably would have been wrong anyways. Like I think at the point where somebody's being verbal,
you think that would have been wrong, or if someone is being verbally threatening to another person.
Let's play this out. So I'll give you a scenario. I'll give you a scenario. So let's say there's a 7-year-old woman on the subway, okay? And he's approaching her and he's saying all the stuff that you said he said. And he goes up to her face. At that point, the appropriate course of action is to walk in between her, and if he resists, then shove him back and then do whatever. That's when the altercation can take place. As soon as you're in a situation where this person is walking back and forth and you wait until his back's turned to you and you grab him around the neck, there's only two outcomes there: severe injury or death.
That only works.
And there's no capacity
only works if you're strong or as strong or stronger than the person that you're trying to.
Indeed, which is why I ask you. Which is why.
4'8" dude. Sure. And there's a 6'6" Giga Chad built with muscle. Yeah, I'm gonna hit him from behind if I need to hit him. I ain't gonna go toe to toe with this guy. If I think he needs to be restrained, I am.
Guess what? If you at 5'8" try to jump someone who's 6'6", you're going to lose. The reason that we teach people how to fight properly is because it's hard to do. Just a thought.
Going to do what it takes to restrain him without dying.
So,
right?
so if he was shot in the back, you would consider that to be a reasonable response because you
No,
didn't have it.
I'm
But you,
not
but
shooting.
But Wick, you
I'm
lack the
talking physically restraining.
No, I understand.
My arms and strength.
I think it's unreasonable to assume that real life operates like a video game where you can expect if you perform a lethal action just a little bit less time, it will not result in a lethal result.
What?
Okay, that was a little weird an argument. Again. Yes, I forgot. Everyone is Rambo, and they all play Call of Duty successfully. That's exactly it.
Never mind. Kidology, do you want to weigh in on it, or shall we continue?
But the technicalities here, like Nick was talking about earlier, the technicalities here matter immensely to the situation.
We have a question from somebody in my chat.
Oh, I do have one as well. But so $5 from the trip. I'm sorry. I wonder what Brooks and President Sunday expected from Kidology. Both were shocked by Kid's take on this. Also, murder and kill aren't the same. Murder requires evidence. Okay, sorry. Go on.
I actually had high expectations for Kidology after Dustin's conversation. Well done, by the way.
Oh, thank you. You're one in a few. My super chat says, thank you so much, Reinhardt, for the super chat. What if Neely did this on an airplane? Would that
Makes no
anything?
difference. Airplane is probably safer from immediate danger.
I think that the more enclosed the space and the more trapped people are, it does escalate.
Most airplanes are going to have an air marshal, at least in the United States. Like if you make a big deal on an airline, you're going to have a situation probably very quickly where you're arrested. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of flight attendants have been teaching themselves some basic wrist locks too. I don't know that, but it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Things by nature. I think there is a natural escalation to these of what is reasonable person's expectation and fear here. If you were on an airplane, 10,000, 20,000 feet in the air, right? Feet, miles. I don't know. Not miles, obviously. 20,000 feet in the air, right? And some guy jumps up, starts yelling how he's going to hurt everyone, right? Or hurt anyone on this plane if he doesn't get what he wants. Then tackle the guy. Restrain the guy. Stop him. Don't wait for him to start killing people or hurting people.
The plane's
Stop
a bit
him
of a,
first.
Yeah, the plane's a bit of a fraud example just because we have the history of plane jackings recently. Or not recently now, but like we worry about that kind of thing because the nature of it is different. If somebody is belligerent on a plane, there's a possibility.
To be fair, to the airlines, that as long as they are following the new procedures that they set out after 9/11, your ability to take a or incompetence on the part of the airline air cabin crew,
especially
and the most significant example I can think of that recently is MH370, and we don't necessarily even know what happened, although given the preponderance of evidence, it seems very likely to me that the cabin crew hijacked the plane instead of anyone else.
Given that it's a much more involved process to get on a plane. If somebody engages in language like "I'm going to hurt everybody on this plane," on a plane, there's a real possibility if this person is not subdued that he can bring the entire vehicle down. It's not so much a threat on a subway. I think in addition to that, once again, like if we're talking about like how they subdue the person, if this person has been determined to essentially just be an unarmed guy, or not armed to the point where we're worried about the plane blowing up, an unarmed guy who is having an episode, talking him down, walling him off, coming between him and whoever he's harassing, that makes eminently more sense than coming up behind him, putting him to a stranglehold. That just opens too many doors. And once again, like, this is one of those things where that would be a questionable action by itself if he had held him for the exact maximum length of time that was reasonably considered to be safe.
We are really in the weeds here about this chokehold. Like,
we'd be having a different conversation. Like, oh, he had like a drug overdose. I didn't know that he was being like. This is a little bit more clear cut even than the fuck, what's his name? The guy who started the. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank.
While you think of that, Fondue for $5 says the Marine ruined his pacifist run by misclicking the lethal takedown button. I mean, fair. But
Jesus, that's cringe.
This is George Floyd. George Floyd. That's it. This is a more clear-cut case than George Floyd. This is somebody who held him for 15 minutes. It's a long time. People say 15 minutes. 6
if
minutes
it was 15 minutes, absolutely.
Honestly, like
again,
3 minutes is a long time.
They're arguing.
No, it does not take that long to kill someone with a chokehold.
In my chat, whether it was 15, 3.
Let's say 2 minutes. Let's say 2 minutes. The 2 minutes of footage we have has him not resisting. We don't see him die. We don't know what we see. You see the problem here. So, it's not written now, Jordan. Come on.
Yes, I think once you once you constrain him and you've got him in that chokehold, if he isn't resisting, if he's going limp, then you are doing something wrong. Then I think that is definitely.
I wouldn't have let him up
what Sunday
entirely, right? Like I wouldn't have let him up, but I would absolutely have gotten off the chokehold. I would at that time
Yes,
you let him go from that, but you keep him, you sit on him, or you keep him down, right? Because
moreover,
again,
once you've
we
restrained
have,
him and he's unresponsive,
The trouble is, once I have put you in that particular chokehold, I have nowhere to go. I have absolutely nowhere to go except more. I have to maintain at least the controlling aspect of the choke. I don't have to necessarily complete the choke, but I do not have to. I have nowhere to go. I have nowhere else to put him other than that chokehold. Like it's not a great move unless you're intending to hurt somebody.
you make sure he's alive. That's not your priority. Yeah. Anyways.
Yes.
The threat that he was going
It is
to
proportional to subdue someone that is threatening other people and saying he'll die in the process.
and end up killing them, even if that was.
So see, now you're doing it again. You're ascribing intent.
No, I'm not ascribing intent. I'm saying the results. This is what happened. The guy's dead. He's dead.
Results are material to the proportionality of action.
So the proportionality of action in your mind was justified for what he was doing. His actual action.
He held the guy on the ground. Why is it calling
and killed him. And
But see, you're doing it again.
No, you keep saying I'm doing it again. I'm saying this is the end results. I'm not saying this is what he meant to do. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. I don't know what's in his heart. Neither do you. None of us know what he meant to do that.
Yes, absolutely. If someone is threatening other people, you are allowed to subdue them.
And it would be like an involuntary manslaughter.
So see,
no, this is what happened. It's to the point of death. So you have
it's not criminal.
It's not, I'm not saying he intended to kill him. That's the difference, right? But if he ended up dying as a result of that, was that proportional?
Yes.
He needed to be killed.
No.
Or he could have killed.
Hold on. Stop that. You keep trying to say needed to be. No. Then why would you
say that?
Why would you say
words in my mouth? I'm saying that's not happening.
Why would you say needed to be killed?
Because what he did to him, his chokehold ended up with the guy.
Oh, this is just our argument all over again, but in a more dumb format.
I have an interesting question, just
Please,
from somebody in
please.
the chat. MJ, thank you for the super chat again. MJ asks, say if a woman gets essayed or verbally violated every day. Wait, women get essayed or verbally violated every day. Are they now allowed to use these tactics, or is that going too far?
If every day
This is nothing.
if someone is sexually assaulting them, they do have the right to stop them.
That's a completely different situation.
Or verbally abused.
Are we saying like are we talking about like by the same person? Or are we saying like in terms of like going to a subway and this occurs?
That's oh my god. Please go lay down, Baba. Go lay down.
I think what MJ, just based on having read what MJ has been saying, I think the idea is that if you don't sort of uphold sort of the tenets of law and order, you sort of have this alternative aspect where you're sort of paranoia in seeing the potential threat of somebody to in such a way.
Well, sexual assault is like another level compared to what this person was doing and what these people.
Initially, when he came up behind him and restrained him, I think that's okay, because as soon as
Trained Marine, not knowing that having your arm around someone's neck not just can but will kill them in excess of a few seconds, sometimes instantaneously. I don't. That's a hard sell.
Instantaneously.
Video footage of it.
There is video footage of it.
Is it public?
Yes.
Public video footage?
And I can't play it on YouTube.
Yeah.
For God's sake, Lance. He came into this without looking at the footage. Like I didn't look at the footage before this, but like he came onto Tim Pool without looking at the footage. Dear
Yeah,
God,
we're not in the same situation, so yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'm not going to put the footage up. Also, we are coming up on 2.5 hours here, which is about the time I want this show to go. I know that this argument does not improve dramatically from there, and I might follow up on this later. I'm going to talk to Sunday, I think. Just clarifying some things for everyone. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that next call-in show, actually. But with that, I want to thank everybody for coming out and wish you all a good night. We have moved the Ukraine stream to Saturday because good news, Hetman says he's getting a new microphone, which should help the audio issues. Next Wednesday, we will be doing something like this again. I will find more stuff for us to review. If you have recommendations, send them to me, either in the Cathedral or in our Discord. Also, we will be doing, I have actually planned out next 3 months worth of half of our content going forward. Next month, we'll be doing, the name escapes me. Stonehouse, I think it was. Stonewall, that's it. Stonewall riots, because it's June and Pride Month, and if anyone has a suggestion of someone to bring on for that, send them to me too. And then the month after that, because I have seen a ridiculous amount of bullcrap about white supremacy lately, we're going to be talking about scientific racism and white supremacy as an intellectual phenomena and where it starts. and what we can and cannot attribute to it for the month of July. So that should be fun and get me in trouble, I'm sure, with the puritanical portions of our viewer base. But with that, I want to thank you all for showing up and have a good night.